Explorer, and it didn't work in Chrome. It kept crashing when I tried to start it up. That's weird. But all right, so let's go to this this week's information here on Blackboard. Web mapping. So I'm going to look at the syllabus here really quick. What I want to do this week is there's not a whole lot of material to cover, a whole lot of new material to cover in terms of tile map services. We talked about them a little bit, and they aren't that complex of a topic to begin with. So I think we can cover everything about tile map services that I wanted to cover today. So we're adjusting the schedule slightly. I didn't want to do the test right after I get back. I felt like tile map services was a good thing to also include with the other map services. So we're covering this week. Next week, we'll do the exam, but it'll only take one of the 2 class meeting times instead of being the whole week like I put on the syllabus. So we're going to cover tile map services today and get those totally over with. Then on Thursday, we'll have a review session. I'll talk about what's going to be on the test, what the format of the test will be, and that sort of thing. All right, so I know a few of you have had questions, but there'll be that review session. So that's going to be on Thursday of this week. So next Tuesday, a week from today, will be the first exam for this course. So a week from today, first exam for the course. I guess that'll be September 29th. Okay. And then October 1st, we'll start talking about the next content sections in there, putting layers together with the web mapping API. So it is possible that I miss another Thursday for the rest of the semester. So even if we get a little bit ahead, that'll probably make up for it. And it never hurts to spend some extra time on a particular subject or whatnot. So that's where we are on the schedule. So the exam will be a week from today on September 29th. Today, tile map services, and Thursday, we'll probably finish up tile map services. We'll probably still say a few more things about them, but for the most part, that'll be a review session that you can ask questions. You can ask questions that have to do with the lab up to this point, and then you'll be all set and ready for the exam. Okay. All right. So you go back to the course materials, and I'm still getting used to this Blackboard thing. I think from now on, all of these weeks that we went through, these first 5 weeks that we went through, or the first 4 weeks that we went to, you have to click in them to then get information from them. So this week I tried it a little bit differently. Maybe I'll stick to this. If you look at the tiled map services, they're just links underneath there. That's just one less click, I think. So I might switch to this format. All right, it's a content management system, Blackboard is. So we've got our tiled map .doc. I'm going to open that up and talk from that like I have in a few other lectures. All right, so we've talked about tiled map services before, and we've touched on what they are, and we've even used Firebug to kind of, or Chrome developer tools, whatever browser, we demonstrated in a few different browsers to look at what's going on. Basically, just to review that, our map services that we've been talking about for the last week and a half, well, not the last week and a half on the calendar, but the last 3 times that we've met have been dynamic map services. And those map services are great for publishing data onto the internet that's changing and that needs to respond to updates frequently. Tiled map services are great for base maps, and also not just for base maps. Some people look at tiled map services as only a tool for base maps, but they're not just for base maps. They're for data that doesn't change very often. Okay? Tiled map services were actually the catalyst for creating what we know as the slippery map today, where you can go onto Google and just pan around and zoom without having the page refresh. That happened back in the mid 2000s. So before that, we actually had, what's interesting is dynamic map services were actually created before tiled map services or tiled maps. Dynamic map services were the first thing on the field. And the reason why that's interesting is that dynamic map services actually require a lot more resources. The reason that those were created first is I believe, that people looked at this issue of creating map services on the internet as trying to replicate GIS. The people that wanted to put maps on the internet were GIS people like us. And so they thought, how do I make a service that's going to be available, that's going to allow a person to do GIS-like operations, to be able to turn layers on and off, and to be able to use the info button to click on it and to get some results back from that layer. Actually, this piece of software that we called ArcView 15 years ago was mostly just that. It was a tool for making maps and not necessarily a tool for doing much analysis. Okay? And so they were trying to replicate tools like this for the internet when they created dynamic map services. And the only real difference is that we had a different language, this XML style sheet type of a language in order to symbolize the maps. And what that did, one thing that did is it presented a barrier between people that were good at cartography and people that were good at basically computer programming or just generally good at computers, that understood what XML was and they understood how to use it. That barrier between those two fields made it so that most of the people that were creating web maps were actually people that were experts in the computer science domain, if you will, not necessarily experts that were cartographers. There were very few people that were experts in both fields. And so the early web maps from 10 to 15 years ago, well, let's say, I said the mid 2000s. So from 15 to 20 years ago, the early web maps were basically characterized by being what we call here Swiss Army knife applications, where the main purpose was to just turn layers on and off and click on them. There wasn't a reason for the web page to exist other than like lots of these were Richland County's GIS data, and they would just be an online version of ArcView that allow you to turn them on and pretty slowly navigate around the map and click on things. Eventually, in the mid 2000s, they were characterized by that, and they were also characterized by kind of ugly cartography. They're kind of known for that because not people that weren't necessarily cartographers were the ones that were creating them. All right, so the next real big advance happened in the mid 2000s. Okay, Google Maps really started it off, and a lot of the ideas that you've seen implemented, or that you'll see implemented today when we talk about it in ArcGIS server, were actually taken from things like Google Maps. OpenStreetMap was an early one that created these tiled map services. And their idea was shifting away from this dynamic map service paradigm where every layer had to be drawn when you you clicked a checkbox, it would make a request to the server that would turn on an additional layer. That layer would then be drawn, the program would be running on the server. That program would execute, would run on the server, create a new image, and send that back to you. And there's a lot of overhead involved in that. And for layers that aren't changing, it's much better that when the user clicks on a layer to go out and get a set of tiles, a set of images that exist just for that area that are already on the server. The server doesn't even have to open them. Okay. One thing that allowed this to happen were that web clients, the web browser that you use, whether that's Microsoft Internet Explorer or Chrome or whatnot, those web clients started to allow for this technology that we did talk about a little bit last week, that allowed for asynchronous requests. In other words, when you panned a map, the map could figure out exactly which tiles it needed on the client, send that information to the server, and just say, I want this tile, this tile, this tile, this tile, this tile, however many tiles it needed to cover the area. And those tiles would come back as images, and then the client could handle putting those tiles in the right places so that the user, and that happens almost seamlessly to the user. As the user pans on the page, almost seamlessly, those requests are sent out and they come back very quickly because they're from tiles that already exist on the server. And the reason that this had to be done here is out of necessity. Okay, if Google and then later some of these other map providers, their goal was to get everybody to start using the maps. Okay, if you think about that time period, if you can remember, if you know, it is 10 years ago. I don't know exactly how old you are, but 10, 15 years ago, they wanted to be able to have people use maps for all sorts of commercial applications. To be able to type in, okay, I'm here, I want to find restaurants, and the restaurants would all pop out. See what I'm saying? So that was their goal, and they wanted to be able to get directions, and they wanted that to be able to happen quickly, and they wanted everybody to be able to do it very, very, very quickly. So when you have a wide audience, it really isn't possible to have this be able to work without the tiles already being drawn on the server. Okay, let's talk a little bit about mechanics, how this is done. So the tiles as they exist on the server are basically images that are 256 pixels by 256 pixels. Now, that's regardless of what scale you're zoomed in at. So if you're zoomed in to the whole world, there is maybe 256 by 256 pixel images that comprise the entire world if you're zoomed out all the way to the world. So there's two tiles. Okay? And when you zoom into each of those tiles, the next zoom level, and that actually is a word or a phrase, a concept here. The next zoom level, that you zoom in from there being two tiles, there will be 4 tiles for each of the tiles in the previous zoom level. So where there were 2 tiles, there are now 8 tiles, okay? Because there's 4 and 4. And then when you zoom in again, you multiply 8 by 4 again, okay? And then by 4 again, and by 4 again. Well, Google and ESRI, and they've all adopted the same system now, supports up to 20 different layers or 20 different levels, and some even go further. I mean, so I shouldn't say up to. They support at least 20 levels, and some even go further down to 22 levels. Okay, so if you could figure out what that number is, how many tiles there are at each level. So we start out with 2, and we multiply each one of them by 4. I don't need to do the math, but you realize that since we're talking about an exponent here, we get into the millions and then billions of tiles that can be created for the whole world. So this isn't something that, for a worldwide data set, individuals do. This is not something that individuals do. This is something that large corporations like Google that have the resources to create a worldwide data set. Because you're talking about a terabyte of data for a tiled map service if it's all pre-cached and pre-generated. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk. This is what I'm talking about here. Okay. So as we go from a smaller scale map to a larger scale map, the number of individual tiles in your map service cascade quite rapidly, very, very rapidly. So this is actually the same concept that exists in when you take a remote sensing. You might have had a raster data set where it asks you when you open the data set if you wanted to create pyramid layers. Anybody remember? Anybody ever done that in raster? In a remote sensing class, do you want to create pyramid layers? Okay. Well, it's the exact same concept in that it's basically creating intermediate pre-calculated layers from you looking at the image at a very small scale to you looking at the map at a very large scale. And with the image, with an image, it's pre-calculating the numbers, but it doesn't apply the symbology until you show it on the map, because you can apply that dynamically later. Okay, so sometimes it takes the form of a pyramid. Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, so what's so great about tiled maps? Well, one thing is cartographers, they loved tiled maps. Okay? Tiled map services now allowed a separate person to be in charge of composing what the map should look like than the person that actually generated the data. Now, there had to be a person. There still had to be a person in between that kind of interface and said, okay, well, this is how you make the map look like that. But the reason that cartographers could play a bigger role is that these data sets didn't have to change that often. And so you could then therefore spend time having a person create a beautiful image. And it could be another reason why it could be, or they spend so much time on cartography, is that a 256 by 256 image, with some exceptions, will take just as long to load if it's a large map or a large data set or a small data set. Remember when we talked about dynamic services and I said, hey, if it takes you a long time to turn this layer on in ArcMap or in QGIS, it's going to take a long time to turn it on in your dynamic map service. That's no longer the case with tiled map services. With tiled map services, if you generate your tiles beforehand, it doesn't matter if it took 30 minutes to draw it or a half a second to draw it, because what it does is it only draws it once, it puts it on disk, and then every time somebody goes to your website, it's already there, okay? So that's when Google had some really good cartographers that got together and made a few different base maps. ESRI jumped on board and did that as well. Bing slash Microsoft did the same thing. And as I mentioned earlier when I was introducing the topic, what really made this possible is that these asynchronous JavaScript requests. And those really became big at this time. It's actually one reason why browsers other than Internet Explorer became so popular in that time period, about 10 years ago, was that these other browsers were much quicker to adopt this technology than Internet Explorer was. And eventually Internet Explorer caught on, but they still weren't as fast as those Firefox and Chrome at exploiting this new technology, this asynchronous request. In other words, a request goes out from a web page and a response comes back, and all the REST response do is alter something on the web page. They make something pop up. They make the map pan. They do that rather than creating a whole new web page. That's what I mean by an asynchronous request. A request that goes on without the user even knowing that it's happening until the response comes back and it updates the page. Okay, and it updates the page. It doesn't cause a refresh to happen. So we're going to be doing some of these when we get into making our own map services, into our map services lately. So it was kind of like the beginning of the golden age of web mapping. Okay, when we could do that. Now, having said that about Microsoft Internet Explorer, I do think I've been, now that I have Windows 10 on this computer, there's a new browser that they're pushing called Microsoft Edge, and it doesn't support everything. Like I noticed that when I launched the web page for this course, I mean, when I launched the recording thing, it made me use Internet Explorer. But Edge seems to be quite fast. Just as a side note, it's just something that I've adopted in the last few weeks, is using that. Okay, so it was revolutionary, like I said in the text there. Yeah, within a year or two after Google Maps did it, lots of the commercial software packages begin offering it. ArcGIS server was the main one that I'm talking there. I've introduced the Arc2Earth. Arc2Earth is actually a program that will allow you to, among other things, allow you to create just a directory of tiled maps that's available and that you can then publish to the internet. You don't actually even need at that point to have a program running, okay? That's one of the beauties of tiled maps. And also one of the reasons why I put services in parentheses, because a tiled map does not need to be a service. It can be, but it doesn't need to be. And what do I mean by it being a service? A service means there's a program running at all times, okay? And so tiled maps can just be a bunch of images. What do I mean by images? A bunch of those 256 by 256 blocks. They can be loaded up and put online in a directory. In fact, lots of times they have directories and subdirectories. They can be put in a directory, and there doesn't even need to be a program running, because as long as I can access that directory by saying like www.georgesmaptiles.com/ the zoom level, the row and the column, and then I get my image just by putting that URL in it. As long as I can do that, there doesn't have to be a program running for that to happen. Now, lots of times, different GeoServer and ArcGIS server do have the ability, and Google Maps works the same way, to actually have a small program running as an interface, so that when a request comes in, it gathers the right image to send out. All right, and in some cases, the image on disk is stored in a different format that's maybe more conducive to storing on disk. For example, it might be stored in a database rather than being stored on a disk. And a URL can't reach inside of a database, but a URL can make a program reach inside of a database and hand back a tile. So those type of tiled map services do create some overhead. If it's a tiled map service, there's a slight bit of overhead because there's a program that has to run to fetch the tile that you need back to the browser. But there are some advantages. Some of those advantages may be that you can store your data in a database, so that it might be easier to transport, it might be easier to back up, it might be easier to organize. Another advantage is that you can, in addition to handling requests for tiles, you can handle other requests. Like you could still handle an identify request. So the program could be running and say, okay, the user clicked here, what is here? And so that would involve the computer running and a separate program and returning the results of what the user clicked on at that point. Okay, so and then you could also have it so that it alternatively selected a different style of base map or a different style of tiled map, but only if it's a service. Okay, so we talked about that. One thing that's interesting is that all sorts of data can be put into tiles. I put this example up here because obviously we would think that, or we should think that the background here, see the streets would be tiled, and it is. It's a tiled map service. But you might think just from looking at this data that the images here are not tiled, that they're just floating on top. Maybe they're symbolized on the client or something else. When in fact, if you look at in the Firebug console, this data is actually not vector graphics or dynamic at all. These are tiled images that are just sitting on top. Okay? So tiled images can have transparent portions. So this area right here is transparent in the picture tiles. Okay? Some of the picture tiles actually come over in a separate tile, like this. You can see the edge of this tile is the edge of this tile, and so the next tile over has the rest of it. So tiles can have transparent sections. So tiled maps can be overlaid on top of tiled maps. Some people think tiled maps are only for base maps, but tiled maps can be used for the feature, meaning the content of the map as well, as long as that data isn't changing very often. Okay? And so what Google probably has going on is they update this maybe once a week or maybe once every evening. They probably have a program that goes through and figures out which tiles individually need to be updated rather than updating every single tile. Okay, if there was a new image that popped up right here. Okay. All right. So I've actually already talked about this last section here. Yeah, I've talked about this right here. So this bullet point here talks about the difference between putting your tiles just in a folder structure on a web server, okay, and taking your tiles and using a program to serve up your tiles in an appropriate, or using an appropriate URL. So if you use ArcGIS server or GeoServer, you're doing this. There's still a kind of a program that runs as middleware in between. Okay? You could, you have to have a little bit more knowledge, and maybe we'll talk about this later. But well, actually, ArcGIS has the ability to export a map as a map cache, and you could upload that map cache. And maybe I'll actually demonstrate that today. But there are other software programs. Arc2Earth does this. It allows you to export your map, however you made it, depending on which software package you used. It allows you to show that. And then what you get is this URL right here. See this? Like I gave my example earlier. But if let's say you put all of your map tiles in a folder, and you just call that folder blah, blah, blah. There, that says blah, blah. Okay? You put it in a folder on the web server called blah, blah. And then you organized it so that it was in folders that were basically the zoom level and the row and column in the world. So for zoom level, the highest zoom level 1, there would just be 1 and then 1 and 2. There'd be two files called 1.png and 2.png in the directory. And then there would be one directory called zoom level 1, it would just be called 1, / underneath that directory would be just one folder called 1. And then inside that one folder, there'd be 1 and 2. Then the next one, there'd be 8 files in the final folder, and so on. All right. Where Z is the zoom level and X and Y are the row and the column. Now, PNG is a very common format for map tiles to be in. Initially, lots of them were created using JPEGs, but anybody know what the problem with using JPEGs over PNGs might be? What's that? It's static. Yeah. So yeah, they can both be static. That's a good. Thanks for your comment. Anybody else? They can both compress. So the quality can be set to 100 on both, or they can be compressed. That's good though. What about this issue that I just came up with earlier? Transparency. Do JPEGs allow for transparency? Anybody know? No, they don't. So if you didn't know that before, now you do. JPEGs, you can still make a tile map services using JPEGs. But remember, JPEGs don't allow for transparency. That format. Okay. So GIF also allows for transparencies, but GIF is actually a proprietary format, so it kind of fell out of favor as a widely used tiled map service. So the PNG file format was created as an open standard and has been widely adopted. So now it's used most often because you can use a PNG and you can use a PNG to do transparency, and you can do JPEG compression inside of a PNG. The only thing is that a PNG will be slightly larger than a JPEG, and that's because it allows for that alpha channel. Alpha meaning the transparency channel. And so ESRI has come up with an option called I believe it's called combined or something like that. We'll be able to see. It's a map cache that is that actually uses PNGs all around the corners, and then uses a JPEG just in the center sections. Okay, and so if you don't have any areas in your center sections that are clear, you can use that and end up with a slightly smaller file size. Well, multiplied over lots and lots of cache, it could be some significant amount of data. You know, if we're talking about a terabyte of data for caching the entire world, it could be, you know, a gigabyte, well, maybe several gigabytes of difference that you're talking about. All right, that's just a little side information that could prove useful. See if there's something else I was going to say about that. Oh yeah. Well, the other thing is that would definitely have to be a service. You couldn't just put it in a bucket because it wouldn't work. Because if it was just in folders, the client would have no way to know whether or not to request a JPEG or a PNG. And so if your URL looked like this, it wouldn't know whether to request a JPEG or a PNG. You have to be able to tell it, okay, you're requesting PNG. And so it would have to be like this, where it would be a web service. So everybody understands the distinction there, hopefully. What we're talking about there is just putting a bunch of images so that they're available on the internet. These images happen to be maps of the world, okay, tiled out into nice, neat sections. This is a computer program that sits as an interface between all of those images and the client, so that some modifications can happen in the request. You can do something because it's a program. All right. Now there is where do I talk about that? I do talk about this, but there is kind of another step, an intermediate step between a dynamic map service and a tiled map service. Okay, and that's called, well, it's called a tiled map service that draws the data on demand. Okay, and what that means is that I have a tiled map service, in other words, a program that's waiting for requests. And when a request comes in for new tile and says, hey, I need this 6 tiles to cover the area that they're looking at. So a new request comes in, I need six more tiles. I go to disk and I see if those 6 tiles exist, and if they don't exist, I go ahead and draw those 6 tiles. Now drawing 6 tiles actually does take slightly longer than just drawing the entire map that they would have needed. But the advantage here is that after I'm done drawing those 6 tiles, they're on the disk. It saves them into the right place on disk. And every subsequent request can use those. This is a commonly adopted technique in ArcGIS Server. So what you can do is, if you know for some reason that a number of tiles got updated or need to be updated, you can just delete them, and the next time they're requested, they will get redrawn, and you don't have to like start a program up that redraws all your tiles. Okay, so it's a very nice feature. The only problem is if your data takes a little bit of time to draw, the very first time somebody goes there, it's going to take a long time. So you still need to think about that. Okay. You need to think about that, how long it takes to draw. The other advantage to that approach is that if there are areas that people just don't care about and you don't know where those areas are going to occur, if you have created your map cache like this, then those locations will just never get drawn, and it could save you a lot of time. Sometimes an intermediate compromise is to have it pre-draw all the tiles from, zooming out to the entire world down to zoom level 10 or 12 or so, which is pretty far in. But doing that will allow those layers to draw fast, and then as the people zoom in, the layers take a few more seconds, but only the first time to draw. Sometimes people are a little more forgiving for a more detailed layer to be returned slowly. Okay, remember, it's only the first time, and it's not the first time for that user. It's the first time for any user. So in other words, if Lamar was using my web page, he zoomed in, and it would create the tile on disk, so that if Cody came back and went to the same location and needed those 6 tiles, they would already be drawn. That's what I mean by, it's different than when we're talking about the browser caching, because the browser also caches information. So if you visit a website and you've already visited that website, and that website doesn't contain any special instructions, oftentimes that information is just reloaded from the computer you're sitting at. Okay, and it only makes special requests, like if you log in or tell it to force it to re-get the data from the server. Okay, all right. So those are some of the trade-offs. Okay, creating tiled map services, particularly as you zoom in, can take up gigabytes of space, and it can also take up hours of processing time. So sometimes it's great to do this, what we call create tiles on demand. On demand. So you set up your map service to be a tiled map service, but you tell it not to draw the tiles in advance. We'll do that. Something that sometimes it's advantageous to just lots of map services, lots of tiled map services programs have the ability to return an empty tile, or a tile that you want returned when no tile exists. So sometimes, if the user zooms in too far, it'll start saying data not available. You've seen that on some websites as you zoom in. Okay. All right. There are programs that allow you to just create tiles for certain portions, whether that's a bounding box, a bounding rectangle, or whether you give it a shape and say only create the tiles for this portion. There's nothing that says you have to create a tile for the entire world. Okay? You can, like what we're going to do today, we're going to take our Hattiesburg, the Hattiesburg map service that I made as an example, turn it into a tiled map service. I can do it just for a small area. If there's no reason for my base map to go worldwide, it doesn't have to. All right. The ability to cache a subset of tiles, that's what that's talking about. Okay, so how do we actually, what are some programs that will allow us to create tiled maps and tiled map services? Because they're kind of two different things, as I've mentioned before. All right, if you want to create I forget that this is recording me, so I'm going to say over here by the computer. But if you want to create tiled maps using a free and open source software package, GeoWebCache is a program that's been bundled right into GeoServer. It was written separately, but now they're bundled together. And we probably won't get to walking through that today, and we may do that on Thursday, or may just put up a walkthrough. In other words, a text document that describes that. Okay, but that's the way you do it in GeoServer, which is one of the ones that we're hitting hard in this class. Another one is called Tile Cache. And then one that I actually use a lot is called Tile Stash. And I believe that the authors of Tile Stash just thought, that's kind of like Tile Cache, but we got to come up with another name for it. And so they created it and they called it Tile Stash. Tile Stash runs in a computer programming language that I like to use a lot. It's called Python. And so Tile Stash just basically sits there and waits for you to ask it to make tiles, and it can cut tiles up beforehand, or it can work as a tiler that will be dynamic. In other words, it'll create tiles as the requests come in, and your tiles could be built from a WMS. So you could set up a WMS and then use Tile Stash to tile that WMS layer. Or you could set up Tile Stash to work on raw data. You have to symbolize your data in Tile Stash using mapnik. Mapnik is not something that we'll cover a whole lot in this course, but mapnik is another program for symbolizing map layers, but it's entirely command line and computer programming driven. There's no interface for mapnik. In other words, you can't sit down and open mapnik. Okay? It's a computer program. You give it XML files, and that's how you tell it to symbolize your stuff. Similar to how we did with the styled layer descriptors. Okay. All right. So yeah, working with mapnik typically requires some Linux knowledge, some trial and error. Mapnik does run on Windows, but it's way easier to get it running on Linux if you know what you're doing in Linux. It's meant to run on a Linux system. All right, so creating tiles with ArcGIS Server. This is something that we'll demonstrate today. We're going to create tiles. It's pretty easy in ArcGIS Server. You can do it as part of your workflow to publishing a service. So we're going to republish the layers that we made last time, whether you made Forest County or Lamar County or whatever county you did. I did the city of Hattiesburg. We'll demonstrate how to create a tiled map service from that. And just some things to keep in mind are that the map services will be generated. The tiles are going to be generated in whatever coordinate systems you specify. Should most often be Web Mercator if you want to use it with other Web Mercator maps. Unlike dynamic map services, they don't have any ability to change their projection. So once they're made in whatever projection they're in that projection. Their image is on disk. They're 256 by 256. And so what that implies is if you want to serve up other data in a different projection, you need to make your base map tiled layer in that projection. Okay. So you also remember you don't have the ability to turn on and off layers. Okay, so all that means, some people think, oh, if I'm using tiled map services, I can't turn layers on and off. Well, not quite. What it means is that anything in that tiled map service can't be turned on and off along with anything else that's in that map service. So in other words, if you have, like with Google Maps, this diagram, this map up here, the yellow road here is in the same map service as the parks, the green park polygon. So I can't turn off just the parks. They're in the same tile. They're in the same PNG. However, the overlay here is in a separate set of tiles. They're the exact same size tiles, but it's kind of like a tile sandwich. So it is possible to create a web map that's made up of a tile sandwich, many different tiled layers. Usually only one of those layers is a wall-to-wall, no transparency background layer, like here. That's the streets and the parks. Okay, but you can have other tile sandwich layers on top of those, and then you do have the ability to move one tile down on the sandwich for the viewer to see, or up. Okay, I mean, you have to put that in your web map. By default, it doesn't exist, but the drawback there is that you then have, for every layer that you want to be able to have the ability to turn off and off separately, that's a separate PNG that has to be requested by the server. So if your map sandwich contains 5 PNGs or 5 images, that's 5 images that get requested. Well, 5 times however many need to fit in the, if your map's opened real big. Let's see here. Let's just go to Google Maps because it's the easiest. If my map's open real big, I can kind of tell how many, we've already done this before, but I can kind of tell how many how many tiles there are. When I move around, you can see the tiles pop, and the next row of tiles pop in, okay? So it looks like I probably have 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tiles here, 256 by 256 tiles. So every time I move around, I'm requesting another, what's that, 24 tiles. Okay, but if I was making a map sandwich, I'd be requesting many more tiles than that. All right. Okay, you can also specify, yeah, in ArcGIS and with the Geo web server, the Geo web cache, you can specify whether you want your tiles to be pre-generated or generated as they're used. Okay, so we'll demonstrate that. All right, so that constitutes all I'm going to say about tile map services, unless there are any questions. And what we're going to do is demonstrate utilizing or creating a tiled map service, and then showing that. We'll use ArcGIS Online to show it on top of a base map. So we'll have our tiled map service on top of a base map in ArcGIS Online. Also demonstrate that. And then the assignment will be for you to do the same thing with your data, and then answer a question. And that'll be the assignment for the week. Okay. I probably won't pull the assignment up, but I'll go into that. So why don't we take a little more than 5 minute break, and I get a drink. And while we're doing that, everybody pull up in ArcMap the data that they want to make a tiled map service of. All right, so do that, and I'll be right back. I don't know how to pause this, so this is in the middle of this video. There'll be like a 5 minute break. Everybody can just deal with that, I guess. I'm going to pull mine up. If anybody has any questions, let me know, and then I'll be back in after I get a drink of water or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of these. And that one's not it. The one above. I'm not sure. Or it might be. It's, so we can look for it, but I mean, you may have to recreate it. It's not like, even if you use this one, it's not the exercise, or you use that. Yeah.
I need to reconnect the GeoServer, the ArcGIS server.
Yeah.
Go to add another location.
This is for, you don't need to do that for ArcGIS. For ArcGIS, you only connect to our catalog.
Okay.
For GeoServer, yeah, you have to get your data out to Sunlight. That's what you're talking about for GeoServer.
Do I add another location?
No.
No, I know there's an
You should have dropped down. Get a drop down. If you done it before, no. Slash. I forgot to use
64.7.
And then slash. I forgot. I put the instructions in that lab. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Is it ArcGIS?
No, it's not ArcGIS because it's, yeah, connecting to it that way it doesn't have anything to do with ArcGIS. It's not ArcGIS. It's some other. I think it's Geo Data Store or Geo Data Server or something. GeoServer Data. See if that's it. But yeah, I definitely can help you with that after class. All right, so what we're going to do is publish our data. I brought it up in ArcMap here as a tiled map service. Now, with tiled map services, all that stuff about whether it's in the right projection or not doesn't really matter as much because it's not drawing the data dynamically. It's going to create the tiled map service, and it's going to either only have to draw it once the first time somebody does it, or we're going to pre-cache it, and it's never, the user's never going to have to wait for it to draw because it's already been drawn. Okay. However, what does matter is that you make sure that the data frame is in whatever projection you want your tiled map server to be in. Okay, so that's a necessary vital step. So we go into the data frame properties, and we find out if in fact it's in the right projection, and it is. I mean, I did that already. Okay, but if your goal is to create a tiled map services, technically you can open up a map document, throw a bunch of layers in, then set the map projection to be in Web Mercator Auxiliary Sphere, and say, okay, even if all the individual layers aren't in Web Mercator Auxiliary Sphere, it's okay. Now, I say that, but you know, if it's a partially cached service, it is going to cause a little bit of a problem the first time they draw it. So it's always a good idea to have your data in, but it matters much less in a cached map service. Okay? So make sure that that layer is selected. I mean that is this is the projection that it's in, or whatever projection you're going to end up using. But most often, for a lot of map services, that'll be this Web Mercator auxiliary sphere. Okay. Say, okay, I've got my map in that projection. Okay, so now I'm going to share my map service. And the way that we do that in ArcGIS, we publish right from ArcGIS, from ArcMap. We say File, Share As, Service. And now we're going to publish a new service. And we could overwrite an existing service. We're not going to do that. We're going to publish a new service just so that we'll have a tiled version and an untiled version. Okay, so I'm going to hit next. And then I forgot that I haven't used this computer before, because before I was using that laptop. So I got to make my connection really quick. Somebody's going to have to tell me what the this is kind of lame that it doesn't show me the administer map services, but it's fine. I can do this publish for now. I think it's because you see how the page is getting messed up a little bit. I think it's because it's plugged into the other monitor, so it's fine. Normally I would say administer map services, but since I'm only publishing them, I'm just going to put publish for now. Publish, and I put the URL in. It's 10.78. Somebody help me with the rest of it. 100. No, I'm not connected to the GIS server. ArcGIS server. I think I've gone here before in one of these other ones. Yep, there it is. All right. 10.64. Okay. And then I say /ArcGIS. Okay. The username is site admin, or is it just admin? And then it's webmapper, right? WE3, is the M capital or not? MAPP3R. It might be. That's WE3. Is it is WE3 or no? It's W3B, lowercase m map. Is the E? Is it just ER? Okay. Okay, tell me if this. Oh. Tell me if this is right. Is that right? Okay. Just making sure. Oh, the username? looks like it's doing something. All right. So yeah, it was site admin and it was that one. Okay. All right. So if you hadn't set that up, go ahead and do that. So now I'm going to go back and say file, share as service again. Publish a service. And now I can choose the one that I published before. My map service name, I'm going to call it map one tiled or something. Tiled. And I'm going to put it inside my folder. So everybody do that. Put it inside your folder. Or if you don't have a folder yet, say create new folder. And then I just hit create. Now it might have a, okay, good. I was going to say, it's cutting off the right side. That's not going to do for this final one, but it didn't cut off the final one. So that's good, right? So this is where we would go to create our map server that we talked about before. So here we're going to create our mapping service, and that's really the only one we're gonna worry about checking this time. Okay. Notice that it's running as a server. We're still going to be able to do map and queries. Okay. But now let's go down to caching. Caching is where we set up tiled map services. You may have noticed that sometimes I use these terms almost interchangeably. Okay. Technically, a tiled map service is not always cached because sometimes the tiles could be creating almost always dynamically. There's really no situation in which you'd actually do that unless you are just testing, having all the tiles being created dynamically every time. The point of a tiled map service is that it's cached. Okay, so sometimes they're used interchangeably. ArcGIS uses this caching term, dynamic. Notice that the tiling scheme, if I've selected Web Mercator, my tiling scheme is not changeable. I'm choosing the typical tiling scheme, okay? Now, by default, it says that caching is going to be done dynamically from the data. In other words, in those cases, it's not caching. It's not doing, it's a dynamic map service. When I choose using tiles from a cache, then this stuff becomes enabled, okay? All right, and we're going to talk about each of these options, okay? All right, the first drop down here allows me to choose an existing tiling scheme, and by default, like I said, that ArcGIS Online, Big Maps, Google Maps, I think that ESRI probably purposely put Google Maps as the last one, even though they kind of created it. They're putting them at the back of the pile there, but they're all using the same one, and that's the default. So if you want your maps to be able to overlay on top of the typical internet map, then choose that. You can technically come up with a different tiling scheme, a tiling scheme that uses different numbers for the tile levels and things like that. There's really no reason to do that here. We're just going to use the first option. Okay. If you said you wanted a specific tiling scheme, it actually requests an XML file that has a tiling scheme laid out. So we don't even have that. So we're not going to select that option. Yeah. All right. Now this is important here, the levels of detail. We're going to choose the minimum and the maximum scale for this tiled map service / image service. All levels between the minimum and maximum scale will be cached. The other ones will be generated dynamically, or depending on what we put in the advanced settings, the user will get nothing at that point. Okay. Now this tries to show you kind of what your minimum and maximum levels look like. So I can move this slider up, and if I go to the left, notice that I'm not really changing the tiles that much. Even if I go all the way out here, well, this isn't showing me tiles, that's just showing me scale. But that should make sense to you. Watch, see it's how it says 63 megabytes right here? If I go all the way up to level 0, I'll calculate cache size. It's calculating out the cache size. I don't even know how long this will take. Okay, didn't take that long. Okay, it says that the estimated cache size is going to be 21 megabytes for that amount of data. I don't know why it went down. Maybe it wasn't updated at first. Megabytes? Oh, gigabytes? So you're caching a larger area. That's all that means, right? Yeah. You're caching a larger area. You're still on 17 as the minimum, as the maximum on this side? You set it at 13? And it's still, so now look, when I go all the way down to 19, mine goes up to 785. So, right, it goes to terabytes. How big is yours? I mean, this is good information. But I mean, what's the extent, geographic extent? So it's all of Iraq. Yeah, so like Hattiesburg and all of Iraq is much bigger. Okay, but that's a great point. Is that you're just doing Iraq, and if you did tiles all the way down to level 19, which actually isn't the smallest level on every map, but it is pretty good. It goes down to the building. I mean, most of the time, most data is not going to support anything more than that. But it's terabytes of data just for Iraq. Imagine how big Google's store is for the whole entire United States. Okay, we're not going to go down that far. Well, you could leave it there if you want, because we're going to cache ours dynamically anyway. But let's move this back up to like 17. You can move yours back up to 17 and see what does it say? 94 terabytes, still at 17. All right, let's not leave it there. Go to 16. All right, go to 15 then. A 10? Yeah, leave it there. Server has that much. I don't think anybody's going to actually get on and request all those tiles, so there's not going to actually be 6 gigabytes. But I just don't want the server to get overloaded. All right. So I'm going to go to level 15. And on this one where it says build cache automatically when the service is published, don't leave that checked. Check build cache manually after the server is published. Wait a second. Is that the right one? Let's go to advanced settings for a second. Ah, that's what I want. Never mind. So go to caching and let's go to build cache manually after the service is published. But under advanced service, check create tiles on demand. And what this will do is that when you zoom in and out, the tiles will be created on demand. That'll be interesting. Okay. This directory is where it's going to put it on disk. The area of interest to be cached, you can modify that. You can say, I only want a certain area to be cached. The rest of it draw dynamically. We're going to leave ours full extent of the map for now. This is the tile format that I was talking about. I said combined. I guess it's called mixed. Mixed means it's going to be PNGs on the outside, JPEGs on the inside. Let's change ours to PNG. Wow, there's lots of advanced. Look at this. We hit advanced settings, now there's more advanced settings. Wow. Okay, here's something that I do want you to change. Well, actually, I don't really care if you change this, but I'm going to change it so it's easier to see. This storage format, compact or exploded. If you say compact, it will store all of your PNGs in a database. You won't really be able to see them. You can go ahead and leave it compact if you want. I'm going to say exploded because that'll allow us to get on the server and actually see what the tile structure looks like. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit better idea. Okay. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to say okay to that one. And I'm going to say analyze here. It's going to give me the same warnings that it said before. What's my highest? Data source is not registered with the server. It's going to be copied to the server. That's fine. And I'm going to hit publish, and it's going to take me a few seconds. Actually, Hilton or Lamar, you have a lot of data, don't you? How much data do you have? Do you know how much raw data it is? There's not that much raw data, right? Yeah. It's not that much. Go ahead and hit. You go ahead and hit publish. Yeah. So these layers are going to get copied to the server like before. So I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to take a few seconds to copy those up onto the server. That's fine. And when it does, we're going to look at it in ArcGIS Online. Now, since it's a cache service, I'm not going to be able to turn individual layers on and off. So that was something to pay attention to. I have all these layers turned on. They're all going to show up all the time. All right. So now we can look at this interface here. This is the URL plus ArcGIS/rest/services. If I go into Raber, I have my original Raber test. If I look at that one, it says, is it a map service? No. I mean, is it a map cache? No, it's not a map cache. Okay. It has those layers in it. Let's look at the difference here when I go to Raber 1 tiled. Now it says it is a single fused map cache. And it tells me the size of each of the individuals. And it tells me all of the layers that it's published. It's got, I mean, not the layers, the levels, 0 all the way down to 19. I said 20 different levels. I forgot that it starts at 0. It is 20 different levels, 0 to 20. All right, so let's look at this just in ArcGIS JavaScript now. We'll bring this up in ArcGIS JavaScript. It's hard to tell, but these are actual tiles now. One way I can prove that is through the developer tools. So here's one of the tiles. That's one of the tiles now, instead of it being a match. Now every time somebody pans and zooms, more and more tiles will be generated to show up over there. And a tile gets created on the server. See, it still took a second. There it is. See, it finally drew. It took a few seconds to draw. But now that's drawn on the server. Now if I zoom in and out, the next time it came in almost instantly. You can see when it updates. It updated now, okay? Whereas the first time it took 3 or 4 seconds to draw it. I'm gonna zoom in one more time and you'll see that. Okay, zoom in, it's taking a few seconds. Oh, I just zoomed past the available zoom levels is what happened. So now, even though I zoom in, it's not gonna show me anything because I said that I didn't want it to create a cache beyond that level. All right. Okay, so that's that, and we created our map service. I could put this on top of ArcGIS Online. Before I do that, what I want to do is Watch when I zoom way out, it's still there, and it's still creating tiles. These are still tiles. Here's my tile. There's one tile. There's actually two tiles. Okay, what I want to do is show you on the server. You're not going to be able to do this, but I'm going to show you on the server what, hopefully I can remember. Oops. 10.64.78.100. Connect. Did I spell administrator right? It's not WebMapper. Because you guys don't have the capability to log into the server here. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to look at the structure. I'm going to go back here for just a second, back to ArcMap. Oh, I lost it. I'll have to try to remember. I'm going to go on to disk where it said the cache was. I think it said C, ArcGIS server, directories, cache, and then Raber map 1 tiled. Okay, so that's really small. But if I go under layers here, and I go under all layers, now you can see the tiles actually exist on the disk. Here I'm opening up one of the tiles. See that? I just opened up a tile, and you can see it's part of the map. So that exists on disk. So now anybody that goes back there will get that same tile. That tile is empty, it's blank. But they just exist here on disk as, I believe it's PNGs, because that's what I told it. I switched to PNG. Yeah, PNGs. So it's just a directory full of a bunch of PNG files. Let's see. Look at somebody else's and see if it looks the same. Okay. You didn't check the exploded? You left it?
No, I checked it.
Oh, it had issues. It hasn't published yet.
No,
What about you, Lamar? Did yours publish? We'll look at yours in a second. It published, but you haven't gone and used it yet? Did yours publish, Lamar? Okay, so look, at this directory is empty right now. Did you actually go look at it like I did? Let's go look at Lamar's and see. Do you see that directory was empty? So now I'm going to go into Lamar's here. And this was it Iraq cities? Okay, so now I'm going to go look at it. Go zoom around a bit and go back over to the server. And look, magically, there's two directories there where there was nothing before. Not magically. The computer created those. You did not check. You didn't do explode. Okay, so these .bundle files are database files. It's really hard to see, isn't it? I don't know why I made it so dang small. But this file says, you know, a bunch of numbers .bundle. Okay, and so he created that database file on the server because he didn't check exploded. He checked compact, which puts it into data. So the PNGs are still in there. They're just organized into, there's only one database per level is what it works out to be. Okay, so if I zoom in a little further and a little further again, Okay, at some point it just doesn't show up. Then I should go back here and see even more directories. So it's caching that data. You can tell it to cache everything right when you start the service up, but if you do, it's going to take quite a while for it to work through every single level. Now, we didn't have that much data, so it probably wouldn't take actually that long. All right, so let's look back here at the assignment, because the assignment is not super difficult. Basically, what I want you to do is I want you to find a couple more maps online that use tiled maps in the background, and then read that and do it, right? And then you're going to get a few extra points if you find somebody that doesn't use Google, Bing, or ArcGIS maps in their background. So in other words, if they made their own tiled map services on their page, as one of your four, okay? You're going to create a tiled map yourself, which you might have already done while we're talking, okay? I know that you have. We'll look and see what the problem is with your data, and should be able to do that fairly easy. It doesn't have to be a base map. It could be thematic layers, like the Mars definitely would fall into that category, okay? This one right here, or no. That looks like, that doesn't look like base data. That looks like overlay data. All right. So where did I put it? Okay. And then don't create too many tiles, because remember, this is a shared server. So make sure that it doesn't create that many. I put in 50,000 tiles, but actually, as long as it doesn't create more than, 200 or 300 megabytes worth of data, you'll probably be okay. All right. As it progresses, you can maybe make bigger tile sets if you think it's necessary. Just ask me before you do that. I'll make sure that there's enough room on the server to get it done. And then what I want you to do is answer this question, okay? What are the primary advantages and disadvantages to using tiled map services on the internet? So I want this answer to be pretty complete about everything that we talked about. And if you just go through and read, it's all listed out there when compared with dynamic map services. Read the document that I followed along as I lectured. So I'm not looking for just 2 sentences. There should be a paragraph, basically. All right, so send the answer to your question along with a link to your tiles to me at the course email address. All right, now I did say in here, you can do this either in ArcGIS server as demonstrated in class, or you can use GeoServer based on the walkthrough I posted on Blackboard. I haven't posted the walkthrough yet, okay? So I will post the walkthrough definitely by Thursday. And so this assignment won't be due for a week after I post that walkthrough. So if you want to do it on ArcGIS server, that's fine. You can get started and finish it. You're already done. If you really like to experiment with doing it in GeoServer, then I'll probably show the walkthrough on Thursday. I won't walk all the way through it, but I'll show you kind of some of the options, and then we'll do the review session on Thursday. But that, just so you know, that walkthrough has not been posted, even though it says which I posted on Blackboard. I didn't quite get that out. All right, anybody have any questions about the assignment? All right.
How do we,
Yeah.
how do we post the server? Like, is it up yet or?
The Geo web server for you guys on the coast doesn't work, but ArcGIS server works. Yeah, so ArcGIS server works. It still doesn't work off campus, but as long as you're on campus, as long as it doesn't work off campus for these guys either. It doesn't work off campus for anybody. As long as you're on campus, you should be able to publish to ArcGIS server. So this assignment should be fine. And you can use ArcGIS server if you need to. Okay, any other questions? That's a great question, thanks. All right. Okay. For those, anybody else have trouble publishing? We'll look at your data real quick and answer any questions. I'll be here for a little while. What message are you making? What's that? Oh, okay.
Project. Okay. I saw this
Okay. Really, the requirement would say I use house from cash. Publish. See what those.
Yeah. Well, it's we had 8 years and then download, but mine would never download. It wouldn't extract it. So. They haven't.
Is this where I got before?
Yeah, we haven't do that with it. Because it wouldn't work.
Okay.
So.
I forgot to say, don't get rid of it. Now, it looks like it works just fine. It could have been a hiccup in the, because you actually are making the internet connection, so like something didn't connect right, find out or something. Dead after something.
Where did you go to
All right. Your question?
The same one.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean,
I'm just going to because the year.
but I mean, as far as like, that's the last one.
No, that's definitely not site admin. Oh, no, it's in that document. It's on Blackboard under walkthrough. Yeah,
No, I'm going to do this. You want you to explode it, right?
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's really easy. We just have to.
Like that one you got, and what did you do? Right?
Oh, this? I actually just typed in free gas. I just Google everything. Oh, you look for shape files. Yes.
No, quickly.
Yeah.
How do you go actually?
All right. So.